Pirates modified their ships to survive storms through systematic engineering, raising the hull, redistributing weight, installing flexible rigging. This is the technical breakdown of those modifications. What they removed, what they added, and how each change improved survival odds in hurricane force winds. April 26, 1717. Off Cape Cod, the Wider rolled in a storm and drowned 148 men in minutes. The ship had been modified to survive this very kind of weather: razzed hull, adjusted ballast, storm rigging, and Samuel Bellamy's crew executed every protocol, yet the sandbar and sudden impact snapped the masts and doomed them. Other pirate crews did survive comparable storms by stripping weight from upper decks, loading stones low in the hold, swapping rigid square sails for small, flexible storm sails, scraping barnacles regularly, despite the vulnerability of careening and even jettisoning costly cannons to prevent capsizing. This is how they did it, step by step. The engineering that bought them time when the ocean wanted them dead. Pirates didn't build ships, they stole them. And they got picky about what they stole, because starting with the wrong vessel meant dying in the first serious storm. The most prized captures were slave ships. Not for the human cargo, pirates didn't traffic slaves. They wanted the ships themselves. Slave traders had spent decades engineering vessels that could cross the Atlantic at maximum speed, because every extra day at sea meant more deaths below deck and less profit. Speed wasn't a luxury, it was the entire business model. The Wider was one of these. Built in 1715 as a slave transport, she measured 110 feet stem to stern, with 3 masts and a square-rigged sail plan. Her hull could reach 13 knots in good wind, faster than most naval frigates, faster than the lumbering merchant ships that carried sugar and tobacco. When Bellamy captured her in 1717 near the Bahamas, he immediately made her his flagship. She was already engineered to survive the Atlantic crossing in minimum time. But slave ships came with problems. The compartments below deck, built to pack human beings into the smallest possible space, created a hull that was segmented and top-heavy. The forecastle and quarterdeck added windage, catching wind that would tip the ship in heavy weather. The pilot's cabin and slave barricades were structural dead weight, positioned high where they destabilized the center of gravity. Pirates captured fast ships and then had to fix what made them vulnerable. Every feature that maximized profit for slavers became a liability in a storm. The first modification was violent and permanent. Pirates knocked down the cabins. They removed the forecastle and quarterdeck entirely. They ripped out slave barricades and pilots' quarters. They made the ship flush from bow to stern, a flat, continuous deck with no raised structures. This was called razzeeing. The word came from the French vaisseau rasé, a raised ship, shaved down. George Lowther demonstrated the technique in 1721 when he captured the merchant vessel Gambier Castle. His crew knocked down the cabins, made the ship flush fore and aft, prepared black colours, named her the Delivery. 50 men with axes and hammers, reducing the superstructure in days. The purpose was threefold. Reduced windage meant less surface area for storm winds to catch and leverage. Lowered centre of gravity meant the ship sat deeper and more stable in the water. Eliminated top heaviness meant the masts and rigging didn't have as much dead weight, pulling them over when waves hit from the side. Naval ships couldn't do this. The quarterdeck was where officers commanded. The forecastle was where forward guns were mounted. Remove those structures, and you lost the entire command hierarchy and a quarter of your firepower. Merchant ships couldn't do it either. They needed the raised decks for navigation and cargo supervision. Pirates had no such constraints. They answered to no admiralty, no ship owner, no one who cared whether the vessel looked like a proper warship. So they razed captured ships immediately, often before even leaving the capture site. The Wider's crew cleared the pilot's cabin, removed the slave barricades, and stripped the unnecessary superstructure within a week of taking the ship. The result was a ship that sat lower, caught less wind, and responded faster to the helm. Handier, sailors called it. More responsive in heavy seas. Less likely to tip when a wave hit broadside. With the upper decks cleared, the ship became too light at the top and too buoyant overall. Wooden vessels floated easily, too easily. Tall masts created leverage that would tip an unballasted hull in any serious wind. Pirates filled the lowest part of the hold with stones. River cobbles mostly. Basalt, if they could find it. Granite, limestone, whatever heavy rock was available at the last port. These weren't cargo, they were ballast. Dead weight, positioned as low as possible to counterbalance the masts and rigging. The physics was simple. Weight placed low pulled the center of gravity down. Weight placed low resisted tipping. An unballasted ship would heel over in moderate wind and capsize in a storm. A properly ballasted ship would right itself after each wave, the stone pulling the hull back toward vertical, but the calculation was constant and unforgiving. Take on cargo, you had to remove ballast, or the ship would sit too low and plough through waves instead of riding over them. Lose supplies during a long voyage, you had to add ballast back, or the ship would become unstable. Fire all your cannons in a battle, suddenly you had half a ton less weight on the upper deck, and the balance changed. Pirates adjusted ballast every few weeks. They kept extra stones stacked in accessible locations so they could add or remove weight quickly. Get the balance wrong, and the ship would either wallow sluggishly or tip at the first large wave. In the worst emergencies, when the ship was already tipping and taking on water, they'd start rolling cannons overboard, half a ton each. Positioned on the upper deck where they contributed maximum leverage to any tipping motion. Jettison 4 cannons and you'd remove 2 tons of weight from the least stable part of the ship. It meant arriving at the next port defenseless and broke. But it meant arriving. Square sails were powerful but inflexible. In normal wind, they caught maximum force and drove the ship forward efficiently. In storm wind, they became structural liabilities. The canvas would rip free from the yards. The masts would snap from the pressure. The ship would lose all forward momentum and sit broadside to the waves, the worst possible orientation. Pirates retrofitted their ships with trysails. These were called triangular sails, rigged fore and aft instead of square across the mast. They attached at the bottom of the mast only, not along a horizontal yard. They were maybe a third the size of the main sails. The advantage was flexibility. Square sails fought the wind. Catch it or tear trying. Trysails worked with the wind, bending and angling to reduce the total force on the mast. They couldn't drive the ship as fast, but they wouldn't snap the mast or rip free in a gale. Most importantly, they were positioned low. Attached only at the base of the mast, they didn't create the same leverage that upper sails did. A square sail, mounted 60 feet up, acted like a lever, prying the mast sideways. A trysail, mounted 20 feet up, distributed force more evenly down the length of the mast. Square-rigged ships carried trysails as emergency backup. Pirates made them standard equipment, ready to deploy the moment weather turned. When the storm actually hit, survival depended on positioning. The protocol was counterintuitive but absolute. Turn the bow directly into the oncoming waves. The prow was the strongest part of the hull, reinforced, designed to cut through water. It could take the impact of tons of water breaking over the deck. The stern couldn't. The sides couldn't. A large wave hitting the stern would smash through the weaker planking, dump water into the ship, and potentially rip the rudder off entirely. A wave hitting broadside would roll the ship over. So crews fought the wheel to maintain that precise angle, bow pointed directly at each approaching wave, for hours, in winds that made steering almost impossible. The sequence went like this. First sign of heavy weather, furl the stern sails. Those caught wind that would push the back of the ship sideways, making it impossible to maintain the bow-first orientation. Then furl the lower courses, the large square sails on the lower masts. Too much surface area, too much force. Leave up the foretopsail and the jib only. In the worst conditions, furl everything and sail bare poles. No canvas at all, just the wind hitting the hull and rigging pushing the ship forward. If steering failed, if the wind was too strong or the rudder damaged, they'd drop anchor. Not to stop the ship, to drag the bow around. The anchor would catch on the seabed or simply drag through the water, creating resistance that forced the bow to swing into the wind, get the angle wrong, and the ship would capsize in under a minute. Tons of water hitting the side, overwhelming the ballast's stabilizing effect, rolling the hull over until the masts were horizontal and the deck was vertical, and everyone drowned, trapped under the overturned ship. All wooden ships leaked. The planks were caulked with oakum, tar and hemp pounded into the seams. But water always found ways through. In normal conditions, the leakage was manageable. A few inches of water in the bilge, pumped out once or twice a day. In storms, the leakage became catastrophic. Wave impacts stressed the hull, the planking flexed, the caulking loosened. Water poured in through seams that had been watertight an hour earlier. The bilge pumps ran continuously. Crews worked in rotating shifts, pumping for 4 hours, resting for 4 hours, pumping for 4 hours again. The pumps were manual, long handles operated by exhausted men who had to maintain rhythm and pace, or the ship would fill faster than they could empty it. If a plank cracked below the waterline from wave impact, from the hull flexing, from rot that hadn't been caught during the last careening, the leak went from manageable to deadly. Water would pour in at a rate the pumps couldn't match. The emergency repair was improvised and desperate. Rig a canvas sling on the outside of the hull. Position it over the crack using ropes run from the deck. Pull it tight so the canvas covered the damaged area like a bandage. The water pressure would hold it in place, slowing the leak enough that the pumps could keep up. Finding the crack was nearly impossible. On a ship with a crew of 75, cargo stacked in the hold, and water already flooding the bilge, locating a specific damaged plank meant guesswork. Often they'd rig the sling based on where water was coming in fastest and hope they'd covered the worst of it. Ships carried spare materials for exactly this reason: raw wood planks, unforged iron, a portable blacksmith's forge, if there was room. If the crew tired before the storm passed, the ship sank. Pumping was endurance. If you couldn't maintain the pace, water accumulated faster than you could remove it, and eventually the weight of the water pulled the ship down. When the ship was already tipping, when ballast wasn't enough, when the pumps couldn't keep up, when survival was measured in minutes, pirates started throwing weight overboard, cannons first, 1/2 ton each. Positioned on the upper deck where they contributed maximum instability. 4 men could roll a cannon to the rail and tip it over. 8 cannons overboard, and you'd removed 4 tons from the worst possible location. Those cannons were worth a fortune. Losing them meant losing your primary offensive capability. Arriving at the next port with an unarmed ship, unable to take prizes, unable to defend against naval hunters. None of that mattered if you were drowning in the next 10 minutes. After the cannons, cargo, supplies, spare sails, anything not essential to keeping the ship afloat right now. The calculation was brutal and immediate. Survive now, worry about consequences later. This was possible only because pirates owned nothing. The ship belonged to whoever could keep it. The cargo was stolen. The cannons were captured. There was no owner demanding an accounting. No company calculating losses. No admiralty court-martial for destroying valuable military equipment. A merchant captain who jettisoned cargo would face financial ruin and possible criminal charges. A naval captain who jettisoned cannons would face court-martial for destroying crown property. Pirates rolled it all overboard and kept pumping. Storm survival didn't end when the weather cleared. Every 2 to 3 months, small pirate sloops needed careening, hauling the ship onto a beach and scraping the hull clean. Marine growth accumulated constantly. Barnacles, algae, seaweed, anything that could attach to the hull did. This created drag. Enough drag to cost 1 to 2 knots of speed and 5 degrees of turning ability. 1 knot slower meant the difference between outrunning a storm that was overtaking you and being caught in it. 5 degrees less maneuverability meant the difference between navigating into a protected cove and being forced to ride out the storm in open water. Careening required finding a secluded beach with a steep slope. Wait for high tide. Run the ship aground broadside. Attach ropes from the mastheads to strong points on shore, trees, rocks, stakes driven deep into the sand. As the tide went out, pull the ropes tight using tackles and pulleys. The ship would tilt onto its side, exposing the hull, then scrape. Use blades, scrapers, whatever tools would remove the growth without damaging the planking. Work fast, because you had maybe 6 hours before the tide came back. Flip the ship to the other side and repeat. The process required 2 to 3 days minimum. During that time, the ship was completely defenseless. Tilted on its side, crew scattered across the beach, unable to sail or fight. Bartholomew Roberts learned this in 1722, when a Royal Navy warship found him careening off the coast of West Africa. His crew was drunk. The ship was on its side. They barely got the vessel upright and off the beach before the Navy opened fire. Roberts died in the first broadside. Pirates did it anyway. They chose isolated bays, Caribbean islands with hidden coves, locations where they could see approaching ships from miles away. They posted lookouts. They worked fast, and they careened every few months regardless, because a fouled hull would kill you just as dead as a Navy broadside. Samuel Bellamy knew all of this. The Wider had been razzied, forecastle and quarterdeck removed, slave barricades cleared, profile lowered. The ballast was properly distributed, river stones loaded low in the hold, adjusted as cargo came and went. The storm rigging was installed and ready, trysails prepared, furling sequence rehearsed. April 26, 1717, the storm hit off Cape Cod. Bellamy's crew executed every protocol. They furled the stern sails first, then the lower courses. They reduced to 4 topsail and jib. They steered bow first into the waves. They pumped continuously. The modifications had worked for months. The ship had survived multiple Atlantic crossings. The crew was experienced. The engineering was sound. Then the sandbar appeared. The impact was immediate. The ship went from 13 knots to 0 in seconds. All 3 masts snapped simultaneously from the deceleration, broke off at the base and fell. The hull lurched onto its side. The retreating wave pulled back, and the next wave rolled the entire 300-ton vessel completely over. Upside down in shallow water, masts broken, hull filling. Crew trapped below deck or thrown into the surf. 2 men survived out of 150. The rest drowned in minutes. Not because the ship was poorly modified, not because the crew was incompetent, because they hit a sandbar in a storm and physics took over. More pirates died in storms than in combat with the Royal Navy. The modifications bought time. The protocols improved survival rates. The engineering was genuinely clever. But the ocean had infinite patience and no mercy. You could raise the hull and balance the ballast and install storm rigging and pump for 12 hours straight, and a sandbar would still kill you. Bad timing would still kill you. Wrong geography would still kill you. The wider wreck sat under 30 feet of sand until 1984. When archaeologists pulled it up, the recede profile was still there, the missing forecastle, the flush deck, exactly as Bellamy's crew had left it. The ballast stones were still in the hold, the cannons were still aboard, the ones they never had time to throw over. Every modification was real. Every step was correct. The ship had survived dozens of storms before the last one. Pirates spent their lives fighting an opponent that never got tired and never made mistakes. They could raise the hull perfectly. They could balance the ballast down to the last stone. They could furl the sails in exactly the right sequence and pump the bilges for 12 hours without stopping. And the ocean would wait until they made one error, encountered one sandbar, got caught in one storm they couldn't outrun. The engineering worked. The protocols saved lives. Hundreds of pirates survived storms that should have killed them, made it to port when they should have drowned, lived to capture another ship and do it all over again. Just not all of them. Not even close.